So good evening, everybody. Welcome to the town hall organized by Circle, the South Yuba River Citizens League, and co-hosted by Yubanet about the impacts of visitors' visitation on the Yuba River. And today is September 8th, and shortly before noon, the National Weather Service put out a fire weather watch for possibly abundant dry lightning for tomorrow night and Friday. So fire weather watch is in effect. What that means is summer may be officially over, but peak fire season by no means. So everybody, don't forget to check the weather, maintain situational awareness, and please, please, please be extra careful. And with that, just a little intro here. The people you see here are all members of the South Yuba River cohort, which has been for, well, quite a number of years now, started to deal specifically with issues in the Yuba River Canyon, in the South Yuba, because it started out as the Purdon Task Force and then morphed into encompassing all 39 miles of the state wild and scenic South Yuba River. And we're here because, as usual, there are a lot of issues. We dodged a couple bullets. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Melinda Booth, who is the executive director of the South Yuba River Citizens League and who came up with this idea. So Melinda, why are we here?
Thanks so much, Pascal. Well, good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. As Pascal said, I'm Melinda Booth. I'm the executive director at the South Yuba River Citizens League, affectionately referred to as Circle. And Circle is a nonprofit organization that's been working in our community for nearly 40 years with a mission to unite the community to protect and restore the Yuba River watershed. And that mission is what's brought us together tonight to discuss impacts due to increased visitation at the Yuba. So as I think most of us are aware, visitation at the Yuba River has been increasing over the years generally, and it's increased dramatically in the past couple of years. The increasing number of rivergoers to the South Yuba has created significant impacts to the river and to the surrounding communities, from increased fire danger, increased trash, to creating difficult and often unsafe access to many of the more popular river crossings. The increase has also led to more patronage to many of our local businesses as well, right? So there's two sides to most coins. We're hosting this town hall tonight for an opportunity to hear from you, our community members, about what you're seeing and what you're experiencing at the river. It's also an opportunity to hear from the different land managers and other officials within the Yuba corridor who maintain our precious resource. They want to hear your concerns. They want to help answer your questions. We want to help share what's possible and what's not and start to get on the same page so we can make some positive change. Tonight, we're joined by Supervisor Hall, Sergeant Bingham from the Sheriff's Office, Jeff Horn from the Bureau of Land Management, Dan Canfield from California State Parks, and Erin Tarr from the Bear Yuba Land Trust. We had originally lined up a representative from CAL FIRE and Tahoe National Forest as well. Due to wildfires, they're unable to join us. But really much gratitude to those who are able to be here tonight. I know your plates are likely just as full and impacted by wildfires as well. So many, many thanks for making time to be here with us tonight. Circle recognized the impacts from visitation were on the rise many years ago. And so actually in 2012, we started a program called River Ambassadors. And the program was started to help address the increase in rivergoers at a critical time when state parks funding was being cut, it was in jeopardy, and the South Yuba River State Park was in peril. The program is in partnership with California State Parks. It's administered by Circle staff, but it's really truly possible because of the dedicated volunteers who join us in person at the major river crossings from Memorial Day to Labor Day, educating visitors on what we call the 5 Ps. Number 1, pack out what you pack in. Please, no fires. Pick up after your pets. Park responsibly. And please, no glass. So in just a moment, and to kick off our event tonight, we'll hear a brief overview of the data that's collected from this season's River Ambassador program, and also being presented is some preliminary data collected via the South Yuba River Public Safety Cohort that Pascal talked about in the beginning, which is a collaboration comprised of county supervisors and staff, state and federal agencies, local NGOs, community representatives. It's co-chaired by Supervisors Hall and Hook, and it's been meeting monthly for about 5 years, so for quite a while. And many of us, as you know, are represented here today. And then after the presentation, which will be delivered by Circle's Communication and Engagement Director, Betsy Bruner, we'll hear from each representative about how increased visitation is impacting them, and then we'll turn it over to you for questions. So with that, I think I'm ready to turn it over to Betsy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Melinda. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so that you all can see what I'm talking about as I go through what we've collected. So a little bit of data from this season, it, of course, just ended last weekend or on Monday technically. And so this has been pulled together rather quickly. What I plan on doing is talking a little bit about visitation numbers, the impacts that we've witnessed, improvements that the South Yuba River Public Safety Cohort have put into place, and then next steps, what happens after this town hall. So in terms of visitation.
Hey, Betsy, I'm sorry to do this. I'm gonna just, we're seeing multiple slides, if that's what you're intending.
Oh, thank you for letting me do that.
Apologies.
No, perfect. Is that better?
Perfect.
Thank you. So as Melinda mentioned, we do have the River Ambassador program. This season, we stationed River Ambassadors at Highway 49 and Bridgeport crossings. We extended to Purdon thanks to funding from the Nevada County Office of Emergency Services at the end of the season, but most of this data focuses on those 2 river crossings. Now, we were only stationed originally from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. And during that time on each weekend, we counted about 13,000 visitors. And so that means that that is just a fraction of the number that actually visited just those 2 river crossings, but it gives us an idea of the number of visitors. Another way of putting it is that oftentimes on weekends, we would see about 100 people an hour. Now, River Ambassadors interacted with over 3,200 people. And unsurprisingly, we learned that most of the visitors to these 2 river crossings in particular are out of towners, but that locals still are frequenting them. Where are they from? A question that we get asked a lot of times, most from the Bay Area. So they're driving a significant distance to get here. Second most from Sacramento, third from Marysville, and the list goes on. But really the takeaway is that they're coming from all over the United States as well as all over the world. We had a notable number of international visitors from South America, from Europe, and from Asia. River Ambassadors distributed 4,000 river safety bandanas, which were purchased by safety cohort members. They did include dual language on them this year in order to address our Spanish-speaking population more directly. And we also collected numbers on that, and we saw at least 1,300 Spanish speakers to the river. Another piece of information a question that we get asked a lot is, how did people hear about the Yuba? And for Highway 49 and Bridgeport in particular, what we found was overwhelmingly people found out about these river crossings primarily from friends and family. About 80% to 90% of the respondents cited this as opposed to social media, which should be given credit for what it has made public. But these 2 river crossings in particular, this is what we found. What were the impacts? So River Ambassadors educate, they do outreach, but they also pick up. So during our time on the trails, we collected over 900 pounds of trash and recycling, removed over 130 piles of dog waste, dismantled 6 fire rings, and also talked numerous groups out of bringing their barbecues into the river canyon. We passed out 150 trash bags in an effort to teach people to pack it out, right? Be responsible for the trash, and they were getting the message. Now, these numbers are just preliminary numbers from the South Yuba River Public Safety Cohort. And I'm just going to paint broad brushstrokes for now, and hopefully we'll have more data to deliver later. But in terms of parking citations overall, they were down this year across all of the bodies, the organizations, the agencies that issue citations. Fires in the canyon were up in certain locations, about the same in others, and we're waiting for more data to come in. Like Melinda said, we all know CAL FIRE is a little bit busy at the moment. The number of injuries and rescues, again, up in some places, moderate in others. We do know there were at least 3 helicopter rescues at the canyon. And one thing we did note this year was an increase in illegal mining and the issuance of citations, as well as reports of illegal mining. So an issue that we're addressing and is difficult to address, which we can talk about later if people have questions. Other impacts, local business numbers. Right now, we were only able to gather the numbers for the unincorporated parts of Nevada County, which saw a 38% increase in rentals. And that's compared to 2020 and 2019, which were about on par with one another. So we are seeing increased revenue in some ways. The safety cohort, in its mission to increase rivergoer safety in the canyon, has made a number of improvements this year alone. We installed toilets at Lang's Crossing, which I believe have not been used yet because Tahoe National Forest shut down literally days after they were installed. Satellite phones are being installed at Highway 49, Edwards, and Maybert Road crossings. Additional porta potties were placed at 49 crossing in order to accommodate the increased number of river goers. Like I mentioned earlier, the River Ambassador program was expanded to Purden. And the life jacket program ran its 2nd year to help, again, keep people safe while in the water. And we also increased coordinated messaging among cohort members on all media channels, and then worked to put up displays like in the Alpha building so that out-of-towners coming to town, grabbing a coffee or a meal could also read information about river etiquette and safety. All right, what are the next steps? So after this town hall, Circle will go ahead and launch a survey later this month. And what we're going to do is take information from this town hall, help to use that to inform the survey, and then give you all an opportunity to fill this out and give us more feedback. We want to hear more from you, how you want the river or how you use the river, and improvements that you may want to see. It'll be open for about 3 weeks, and then we'll go ahead and analyze the findings and share them with the public in an e-booklet. If you've seen the Growing Green results, it'll be shared in much the same way as that. And so with that, I will turn it back over to Melinda.
Thanks so much, Betsy. Well, I think what's happening next is we have some questions for our panelists. And so we're going to give each panelist a few minutes to chat here. And Pascal, if you were planning on moderating this, feel free to jump in, or I'll just kick it off with myself here while I got my mic off or on, I guess. So panelists, here's the question. You did get them in advance, but here's a little refresher. We're going to be asking everybody, how has visitation impacted you personally and or professionally, however you choose to answer? We want to hear some of the impacts that you've experienced. And then is there anything that you're thinking about? What would you do to address the impacts? However you want to answer that. So I'll just kick it off, and I've had a chance to speak quite a bit, so I think I'll keep my answer fairly brief here. But personally, I found myself in the last couple of years visiting the river less often, particularly in the summer months. I think our off months are a little bit different, so I'm going to focus on sort of our higher visitation summer swimming months, if you will. So I visit the river less often, really not on weekends. I find myself sneaking down into the early hours for maybe a sunrise swim, or after work on weekdays. So I've seen a decrease in my own personal visitation just to frankly, not wanting to deal with the crowds. Professionally, I would say for me, the impacts have been pretty severe. This is what I do for a living, right? Is think about the river. And what I can tell you is that the community loves the Yuba River. And I've been hearing from many of you for the past 2 years in particular, you're outraged at the impacts that the visitation we're receiving is having. You all care really deeply for the Yuba. I like to think of it as the jewel of our community, and that's resonating with a lot of the feedback I'm hearing from you. You know, it's more than just a body of water to many of us. Seeing it left worse off than it was has found you all speaking up. And so I want to just say thank you for caring. Thank you for taking time to share your experiences. You know, as Circles ED, and personally, I'm right there with you. And I want to do whatever I can, personally and professionally, to help protect and restore the Yuba. And so Circle, you know, has been working to address these impacts through our River Ambassador program. We talked about that already directly, and then through our participation with the safety cohort. And to best address these impacts, my goal and our goal, as Betsy shared with you, is to try and gather a more comprehensive understanding of the issues. We think we know what's going on out there, but we want to kind of double check and check in with more eyes and more ears. So we're checking in with our cohort comrades, and we're checking in with you. So that's one of the reasons for the town hall tonight. And then also the survey that we're going to follow up with to gather even more data. And we want this data because once we compile it, we really feel like this data can help tell us how to best address some impacts and to help us better articulate a need for increased funding and resources for our region. So our goal is also to support the land managers. You'll hear about this, we have a patchwork of ownership within the Yuba Canyon that makes certain things really challenging. And they're out there doing a great job. They're doing their very best, I can guarantee that. And we want to support them the best way that we can. And we really just want to find a way for people to enjoy the region while not loving the river to death. So those are some of the goals. And I think I'd love to turn it over to others and hear from you. And I think next up, unless Pascal, should I pass it back to you now?
You know, you're doing a great job. I can totally sit here and you can run it. Go for it. Who would you like to speak next?
Well, my agenda says that we get to hear from Supervisor Hall next.
You know, mine too.
Well, I will take that name check and jump in here. Thank you. And I want to first thank Pascal for hosting this, and Melinda and Circle and Betsy for putting this together, providing a public forum for you all to hear what is going on and to provide your input. I also want to shout out to a number of people who have been working behind the scenes in the South Yuba River cohort for years. To Sarah Holyhead, who pulled together a lot of these statistics and has been staffing the group for this last year. To Jeffrey Thorsby, who's been staffing it for years, initiated the life jacket program, as well as a few other things. Steve Monahan, who pulled together, found funds to do the cell phones that we now have down there. Trisha Tillerson, who has made sure that we have signs, parking signs, over and over again because they get stolen or shot at. And our OES team, Paul Cummings, who's been involved from the very beginning as well. So as you can see, this is a huge group effort. The county, what's funny is the county doesn't really technically own any piece of this. We don't have control over the roads, the bridges, the water, the camping areas. It's simply, this whole area resides in the county, impacts us greatly, is a huge benefit to all of us here in the county. So we've taken on this convening role to help bring everyone together so that we can resolve this, because it is going to require all of us to do that. And so to start out with the impacts, the professional impacts, as you can see, are that we are putting time into this effort, this group effort, and funds. We have put quite a few funds into all of these different projects, which I am more than happy to do. The funny thing is that we don't have a bucket for this kind of money. So we've had to scramble and be creative. And we have a great team to be able to do that. So we can put some funds in where it's easier for us than others, or where some small win would be a great thing to do. Professional impacts also include the same impacts to everyone else. The fire impacts that, although we now have a fire ban in the canyon among multiple agencies, we know this fires still happen, and we all know what happens if a fire gets out of control here. And we stand up our OES, our emergency services group, there to convene assistance to folks in any emergency. So they're involved with every single fire that happens. We're also concerned, obviously, with the public safety of folks who are spending time at the river. We know it impacts all of our first responders who need to get down there if something happens. And then again, all those people and departments I just mentioned are spending time and creativity and funds to try to make this work for everyone. To me, this is a labor of love, because the Yuba River is one of my favorite things about this county. It's why I'm here and stay here and love it so much. And we want it to be a joyful experience for everyone. We want locals to have the access to it that they've always had. And we want to be a friendly place for visitors to come and enjoy the river as well. They learn to appreciate nature and the wildness of the river. And for many people who don't get to get out of the city very often, it's just such a gorgeous place to visit. But the impacts have been overwhelming. And so everyone is stretched thin. My personal impacts, I'll second Melinda. I think there have been 2 years there I never got to the river. I wasn't going to go during the weekend. It was difficult to get out and make an effort. I just didn't want to deal with the trash and the people. And how sad is that? That's one of my go-to places. So I think we all have felt those personal impacts as well. I want to say that I feel like this group has been amazing. For the federal agencies, state agencies, nonprofits, small groups, county, we worked together so well and so hard and worked through so many weird bureaucratic obstacles to get things done. And we're going to keep doing that. And I'm personally advocating for whatever small voice I have to try to get our land management agencies more funding and more staffing, because they are so stretched thin. And hopefully they'll be honest about that when they get a chance to talk. My big ask is for people, we need people to really take their personal responsibility. A lot of the things that Melinda talked about, pack in, pack out, don't create a fire, park in the designated places, please. Allow the first responders to get down there, and work with us to find more creative solutions. But we really have to ask a lot of you, of everyone, to take personal responsibility to help keep our river clean and safe. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Supervisor Hall. I wasn't sure there, Pascal. I just jumped in. Why don't you take it from here? I talk far too much.
Okay, so next we will hear from Nevada County Sheriff's Office. And Mike, for you, especially professionally, how does the increased or the visitors impact you in your day-to-day job?
Yes, thank you very much, Pascal. I want to echo everybody else's comments. Thank you very much for hosting this, Circle for putting this on. All the partners, it's really amazing to see the partnership and everybody get together at these meetings to solve issues that we can't necessarily solve ourselves independently. We have to have the combined buy-in of all the agencies, of all the nonprofits, and of the community. And I'm really encouraged to hear the numbers of folks that are tuning in tonight. I think it's a positive thing to get feedback from the community to hear exactly what their thoughts are and how we can continue to address these concerns to make the river safe and enjoyable for everyone. Professionally, we have a lot of concerns. We have a lot of issues that the Sheriff's Office addresses in coordination or collaboration with our land management partners, BLM, state parks, U.S. Forest Service, as well as private property owners that own small slivers of this land where people recreate. Some of those issues have already been covered. Obviously, the public safety issues, right? We're concerned that when we need to get down there for an emergency, whether it's a fire emergency, whether it's a medical emergency, whether there is a search and rescue, somebody fell and broke their ankle, we still got to get down there to address those issues. Probably the number one issue that confronts public safety and fire right now is parking issues and safe access. And I would echo Supervisor Hall's request that people follow the directions on those signs. The partners here have done a really good job of increasing the signage down at the rivers, I think, in my patrols down there, to kind of let people know, to guide them where is a safe location to park. Aside from that, other issues that we deal with, fires, the fire danger. We hear the concerns. We work with our partners, with CAL FIRE, with local fire agencies, with our other law enforcement partners to help out and address those concerns on those other public lands. Camping issues are somewhat of an issue. People do have some concerns that people are camping down there. And a lot of times with that camping comes fires. And as well, we have our typical standard calls that we get down there. Aside from fire danger or whatnot, we have, drug activity that's reported down there. We have vehicles, blocking the roadway, or we have vandalism to vehicles, vandalism to the signs that are posted down there to keep everybody safe, whether it's parking signs or whatnot. Sometimes those come up missing because people get frustrated and want to park where they want to park. So we constantly have to go out there and monitor that situation and address the issues with missing signs. Litter. When I recreate on the river, and I'm sure everybody here, when you recreate on the river, you don't want to walk past large trash piles. You don't want to walk past discarded cigarettes. The river ambassadors do a great job meeting people at the start of their day to kind of gently remind them of etiquette and rules of the river. And really, one of the last things that I would address that is on our minds right now is evacuations. Heaven forbid that we do have a critical incident that happens down there in those canyons. How do we evacuate people as safely and efficiently as possible? A lot of that stems from parking. And are people obeying those signs? If people are obeying those signs, we should be able to get fire trucks down there to address the fire issues, and hopefully we can get people out of there as safely and efficiently as possible. It's going to be a huge challenge, but it's not made any easier by parking in undesignated spots or whatnot. And then also, as has already been said, one of the issues that the Sheriff's Office confronts is the pure numbers of visitations. We live in a great community. We have awesome natural resources here. It's really a treat that we're able to spend time here. And we have to recognize that people from out of the area want to come in and enjoy these same resources. And how do we do that as safely, efficiently as possible? That's where we look to the cohort to try to come up with combined messaging, coordinated messaging, and we want to work with the public. So we want to hear your questions. We want to hear the concerns, and we want to hear some solutions also. We can sit around and we can roundtable it, and sometimes we might get stuck from our own viewpoints on how to address things. But sometimes there's really great ideas that come from the public. And, I think that's one of the great things about continuing this conversation, not just amongst the cohort members, but among the public. I look forward to hearing some solutions that people might have. So with that, I thank you very much, Pascal, unless there's anything else you want me to touch on.
You know what? We'll toss it over to Jeff Horn with BLM and see what's going on their side, on their lands, and what else is new, Jeff?
Well, thank you for having me and putting this together. I appreciate the effort. What's new is, I think the question at hand is, what is my professional experience with the South Yuba. I think last year and this year are very, very different years. And that's a good thing, because last year was one of the craziest experiences I've ever had as a land manager. And I think that, everything from the COVID protocols to to overcrowding and just absolute disrespect for resources was something that I, as I said, I've never seen that before to that degree. This year, however, I do think that we're experiencing a lot less use, and we're actually seeing some good strides made, I think, in parking. I think the parking has sort of, you know, the increase in fines and the you know, laying of the tickets on the windshields, I think has really had a positive effect on that issue. Not to say that we're certainly not there yet, but that's a positive sign. And that's something that I really want to strive in the next couple of years to try to address the parking, because I do feel that that is a significant safety issue and something that we can, I think there's ways of addressing that, you know, if we can just get the cars out of that canyon, that would be a start. I think the negatives this year have been an increase in vandalism. We just got an unbelievable amount of things stolen from our campgrounds. We got signs ripped off, ripped down, shot at. Our trail counters disappeared numerous times. So I'm frustrated with that, but we're going to rebuild and get it back. I think as the supervisor mentioned, we don't have much staff, and that's something that we're looking to increase. So we have increased our maintenance staff. We just hired a new person that will start probably in about 2 weeks. We've got increased law enforcement. So we're looking to really upgrade and improve our boots on the ground, which is, I think, the most critical thing when it comes to managing a river like this. Is if you don't know what's happening and you don't know what's going on out there, you're not doing your job. So we have increased our patrols. This year we did 13 patrols. Unfortunately, 3 of them got smoked out, but 4 of those were with law enforcement. And we did do some pretty good homeless abatement on a couple of occasions. There was a kind of an unfortunate case of a guy that was, I think his plan was to die on the river, and he was evacuated and flown out. So in coordination with state parks and the sheriff's office, we've had some pretty good positive impacts on the homeless situation, I think. That is something that it's a tough thing for a managing agency like ours to handle, and we're not very well equipped for it, but we're seeing it increase over the years. Yeah, I think that's really it in a nutshell. I think, increased, visitation means we got to step up our game in terms of patrols, and that's what we're trying to do. So I look forward in the next coming years to, increasing our staff and increasing our footprint on the South Yuba.
All good news. Thank you, Jeff. And now to Dan, who is the Sierra District Superintendent and responsible for a whole bunch of parks, including everything along the South Yuba. So Dan, how's your summer going?
Oh, just wonderful. Just wonderful. Thank you, Pascal. And I am responsible for a lot of parks, but South Yuba River is definitely a special park and a special place. And I really appreciate the time of you folks to put this event together and the public for participating. And I definitely agree with Jeff. Summer of 2020 was off the charts. I saw new stuff that I never thought I would see in the Lake Tahoe Basin. And so we're comfortable to say that we've eased back a little bit from that, but still have just a basket full of issues that we need to work through and continue to work through. And so I guess to answer the question professionally, management of the state park lands like South Yuba River is driven, from my perspective, by the mission of the department, which can be seen as something of a double-edged sword. The state parks mission, in short, or briefly, is to first of all to care for our special natural, cultural, and physical resources of our state parks, and secondly, to provide for the enjoyment of these lands by the public. And so those can be seen as in opposition in some ways. The more folks you allow to enjoy the lands, the greater the impacts are to the resources. And the more that you restrict access to the lands to protect the resources, the less public gets to enjoy it. So that's the kind of conundrum that helps us manage our state parks. And I would say a big part of my job as district superintendent is trying to balance those two apparently opposing goals through programs and projects and through partnerships. Always utilizing the 3 E's: engineering, education, and enforcement. But recognize that could be very, very challenging at the South Yuba River, given some of the issues that we've talked about already this evening, the mixed land ownership part of it, and the large, what I would call public domain exposure, where you have parklands and public lands that are accessed at many different points along public roadways or other public lands. So that's, as opposed to we have lots of parks in the state park system that have a very small public exposure domain where some of them even have a gate. And so we control each and every person that comes into the park. Obviously, that's not the South Yuba River. It's quite the other end of the spectrum when it comes to that exposure to the public domain, which is part of what makes it so wonderful and so special, I think. And I realize the issues that we're talking about are longstanding. I benefit greatly in my position from the mentoring of Chief Ranger Matt Green, who has been involved with South Yuba River and Circle and the cohort for many years. So I take his counsel very often on these topics, and he is my he's my knowledge source on that. And so I know these issues have been longstanding, and they're changing. They're being amplified by increased visitation and in some ways poor behaving humans in conjunction. So more of them doing bad things. And is that a trend that will keep going up? I hope not. I hope we're seeing, not to speak of curves in this day and age, but I hope we're looking at more of that type of curve. But then, as we mentioned earlier in the call, the social media aspect of the word is out, especially if we can get some water in that river. It is just a super, if you live in the Bay Area or Sacramento Valley, to be able to come to a place with the special aspects of the river and the scenic and the granite and all the wonderful things. So I suspect we will continue to see visitation levels, high visitation levels, and I'm going to hope that we're going to see better behaving humans. There are no easy answers. I know there's a lot of smart people on this call and elsewhere that are working on solutions to those, and I'm committed to continuing that engagement to work through those problems and those issues. Probably more importantly, I'm continued to focusing the public safety efforts of our state park rangers in the South Yuba River corridor, and their search and rescue and their public safety and their removing illegal dumps and all that wonderful things that they do, and which is incredible, for there are so few of them, and we do need more. Agreed on that one. And I know myself and my staff is committed to continue to work through these problems, and look forward to hearing from the members of this meeting about innovative ways that we can move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. And Erin, Beerer Yuba Land Trust. So about what, a little more over a year ago, you were incredibly busy. Has it gotten any better, or what's going on?
Yeah, thanks, Pascal. Yeah, about a year ago, we were dealing with the impacts from the Jones Fire to the Independence Trail. So having this cohort and being a part of this cohort was so helpful through that whole process, and still is. Just the partnerships and the support that come from all these groups is really helping us move forward and figure out how to rebuild that trail. But yeah, regarding the impacts to visitation, kind of what the land trust role is. So we act as land managers and recreation providers in the community. So all the way from the lower Yuba and Yuba County up to Grouse Ridge and the headwaters, we have lands, we have trails that we are actively managing and looking to conserve. So really looking to enhance the quality of life in our region through those things, conserving land and building trails. So about 19,000 acres to date. Some of that is public outdoor recreation, some is wilderness areas for wildlife, also sustainable working agriculture and forestry lands. We've also built and maintained 45 miles of trail. So one of those is Independence that we co-manage with state parks. So we're really looking there to connect existing trails, providing accessibility for all, providing alternatives to car travel, and then just creating a healthy community. So, the impacts that the organization has seen related to the increased use. First of all, we recognize that Nevada County is an outdoor recreation destination. So people love to come here because of the South Yuba River. A lot of that is because of that beautiful river that everyone has worked so hard to protect. But what's become really clear is that the recreation areas aren't set up for this heavy use. So with COVID, seeing people kind of encouraged to go outside, it was the only place they could go. They were getting outside, exploring new areas. That was wonderful to see, because we really believe that when people connect to nature, it creates a connection and understanding and compassion for nature. So that's what we're hoping comes out of this. So it really was good to see many more people coming out and enjoying nature. But some of the negative aspects that we saw were heavy trail traffic, damage to sign and trail infrastructure, vandalism. We've had a lot of game cameras stolen and things like that as well. And then just a lot of parking congestion at the trailheads. So what are we doing to address these impacts? So we really want to protect, enhance, and expand access where it makes sense. So that's part of what we do, is we look at new areas to protect, new areas to potentially bring the public into, because we do feel like with every new access point that we create, it could create a solution somewhere else that makes those solutions a little bit easier. So we responded to these increased impacts by improving a lot of our parking areas and heavily used trailheads in Grass Valley and Nevada City, along with partners. Also made other trail improvements like signage and repaving the Lytton Trail to restore ADA access. But just realized there's a lot more work to be done in the South Yuba River Canyon. So some of the projects that we're working on down in the South Yuba is our Rice's Crossing Preserve South. So this is just below Bridgeport. We've been building new trails down there, making plans to open that up to the public for hiking and fishing in 2022. Another tool that we use is conservation easements. So protecting private land with permanent conservation. So protecting it from development. So stopping some of the development that's happening in these remote areas that could increase fire danger. So currently we have about 1,000 acres under conservation easement in the South Yuba River Canyon. And Independence Trail, of course, we own 200 acres there, co-managing with state parks and working now to get that funding to rebuild that trail asset. And then up near the town of Washington, we're working on a big acquisition of private lands to get into the Forest Service hands that would protect the current public access that's there, as well as the habitat values. And then the last one is up on the Lake Spalding Trail. So just above Lang's Crossing, we're working on a new bridge crossing Jordan Creek for equestrians, bikers, and hikers to provide safe access. That'll also be part of the Pines to Mines Trail that'll connect Truckee to Nevada City. So I guess, enhancing, expanding, that's really what we're looking at, as well as supporting all of our partners that own these lands at the river crossings. Very supportive of expanding parking at the river crossing, increasing funding for patrols to enforce the parking issues, improving the existing trails, improving signage and kiosk information, expanding trails, and improving restroom facilities. So thank you.
Thank you, Erin. And I'd like to welcome Trisha Tillerson, who now is the Nevada County Community Development Agency Director, and who for the longest time was the point person when it came to signage or roads or parking, because she was, before ascending to her illustrious position, she was also the Director of Public Works. So thanks for joining us at the last minute here, Trisha, because we got a lot of questions from people about why isn't there more signage, and if you put more signage, could you, Nevada County, could you, for example, at each of the river crossings, could you come up with reserved parking spots for emergency services? So they have 3-4 parking spots that would be right at the crossings, that would be so clearly marked, and that would just be for fire, for law enforcement, for ambulances. Is that something you can do? And in general, what was your experience with signage and signs and no parking, paint, etc.?
Well, thank you, Pascal, and thank you for inviting me to participate on the panel. As far as parking, it has been a challenge at both Purdon and Edwards crossings in particular. We have put up, I can't even tell you how many signs over the last several years, 4 years at least, out there. The problem, like a lot of other folks were mentioning, is vandalism primarily. People removing the signs, shooting the signs, damaging the signs in other ways. I have not heard that we don't have enough signs down there. If you've been down to either site, especially after we're done updating the amount of signage, there's quite a bit of signage down there. When people park illegally, they're often right below a no parking sign. And that's really why the number of parking tickets has increased so substantially. As far as dedicated parking for law enforcement. So we have worked very closely with CHP, our Sheriff's Department, and our fire agencies to identify where these no parking zones need to be. What we've done primarily is created no parking zones, and that's where the emergency responders can park. They're not restricted by the same requirements as everybody else. The problem, however, is that people are still parking in those no parking zones. Before we had where it said emergency vehicles only and they would park there. We figured no parking signs are even clearer, do not park here, and yet they are still parking there. So we will continue to put up signage. Meanwhile, we'll be going to the Board of Supervisors in January to talk about a recreation master plan. And that's something where we're gonna look at and talk about and reach out to the public to talk about improvements for recreational uses, including parking at the crossings. So there is plans in the future for long-term solutions, but it's going to take us a little bit of time to get there. So very happy to hear this meeting and hear from everybody. Thanks.
Thank you, Trisha. And I just scrolled through the questions that are in the Q&A section, and I believe they are very similar to the questions that we received ahead of time. And a lot of them are dealing with limiting access or actually getting the carrying capacity, not exceeding that, and what can be done because of the checkerboard ownership, private, state, federal, of course, is a problem. So is there a way, for example, could state parks come up with passes, visitor passes that you have to have before you can access anything? And if that would be the case, how would that be enforced? So Dan, I think that's definitely one for you.
Yeah, as I mentioned in my answer of the first question to the panel is, these are park lands. These are the people's lands. And so under my authority, I mean, if there's an approaching flood or a fire, is kind of the under the circumstances in which I could restrict, access. But to choose who can't park there is something that I wouldn't want to take on. I see around the state, there's movements in other areas or with high visitation, with the impacts of the traffic and to the other issues that come, trying to do a permit system. And so that could be something that we could work on. The challenge, of course, is as I mentioned, that public domain, the amount of parking that occurs. I can do a reservation system for the limited number of parking spots I have at some of the crossings. But that's without a associated restriction, a more extensive restriction of other parking. I don't think it would just create more problems, and it could hurt those. I mean, one of the benefits of living close to a wonderful place is you can get there after work or early in the morning. So I wouldn't want to to step on that. So I saw that in the frequently asked questions. Of course, we have a pass that you can purchase, so you don't have to pay each time you go, but it is still who gets there first. Currently, and that would be at the Bridgeport Crossing is the lot that we have that you need to pay. But at the other informal parking spots at Edwards and Purdon, I would not have the ability to do that, that type of setting aside spots.
And I believe that would be probably the same for BLM, because again, public lands and access. Or Jeff, is there any option to limit access to, well, first come, first serve?
Well, I mean, I think Dan pretty much nailed it. I think limiting access is a difficult thing. I mean, we're talking about, you know, it's like a house with 1,000 doors. I mean, you've got so many different ways for people to get to this resource. Enforcement would be challenging, to say the least. I think that there's the impression that somehow development of a carrying capacity is going to be the, you know, that will solve our problems. And I can assure you that this is not a river that establishing any kind of carrying capacity that's unenforceable is going to have any huge positive effects on. I think, and unfortunately, it is not a wild and scenic river that's federally recognized. So we don't have the laws that come with that to promulgate rules for things like limiting access. It's also not a wilderness area, for example. So for a federal agency to look at those kind of impacts and limiting access and use, those are the laws that we really hang our hat on. And in terms of trying to, you know, promulgate those rules that make it, you know, actually enforceable. So I think the problem lies in the actual cars themselves. And the people, that river can handle a fair amount of people, but it cannot handle the cars that it has. So I think the real crux of this one in solving those issues with safety, at least, is to get the cars and keep the cars out of the canyon some way with some kind of a shuttle service or things that we've discussed at some of our meetings. That's where I really see the benefit and actual, you know, solving the problem rather than dressing it up. There are some, you know, permits are, again, as they're as good as they are enforced. I mean, look at, there were some comparisons to Desolation Wilderness. Why can't we have permits like that? Again, it's not a wilderness area, so you can't have a wilderness permit. And wilderness permits, you have to have somebody to enforce those. And that's one of the issues that we have currently. So, yeah, that didn't answer any questions, but
hey, it's always good to list it where we're at and what we actually can and cannot do. Another thing that's come up here a couple of times now is the safety issues. And maybe for people, for a lot of us who haven't gone to the river in a while, maybe Melinda, you could maybe identify the locations where with the satellite phones, because the question about cell service in the Yuba River Canyon is non-existent for, I'd say, I don't know, 97-98% of the area. There is no cell service. So, and the satellite phones, if you can remind us where they are, and then maybe Mike, if you could talk a little bit about the actual operation of the satellite phones, because every once in a while they're being used or it's hard to use them. So Melinda first and then Mike, please.
Thanks, sure. And hopefully I'll get this right, but those who are more educated than I, let me know. But Purdon has a satellite phone. I believe there's one at 49. They're putting one in. There's one that's going in at the Maybert crossing in the little town of Washington. I'm actually unclear if that's installed or not yet. And then I believe there was one at Edwards as well. So we've been working on it. I know that we've also installed them in the past and they've been vandalized almost immediately. So that again is an ongoing challenge that we have. But I know that the one that went in last summer that was vandalized was fixed relatively quickly. So it's definitely a help. And the other thing too, to touch on in terms of just communication, this is limited access, but our river ambassadors, when they're down there, do have satellite phones, and that's in a partnership with the county. So there's some additional support there if you happen to be there. on a weekend during certain hours. I personally value the solitude that not having cell service in the River Canyon brings. It's like a two-sided coin. We want the connectivity for helping with issues, but it's kind of nice to be able to unplug and enjoy the river in that way.
And Mike, can you talk a little bit about how the sat phones work, and are they being used, and what kind of results?
Yeah, they are being used. They're being used. I don't have a statistic on how often they're used, but typically what happens is if there's an emergency or somebody needs to report some sort of incident going on down there, they pick up that phone. As long as there is a vantage point to the sky, they can reach our regional dispatch center. Those phones only go to our regional dispatch center. So our local dispatchers triage that incident, determine if it's a fire issue, if it's a law enforcement issue, whatever that type of incident is, and they send that information, they transfer that call to the appropriate agency. If it's for the sheriff's office, if it's for BLM or state parks, or if it's a fire or medical emergency, that's all done by our regional dispatchers.
And I believe the one of the issues that was at some point, people were like, nobody is answering. Those are satellite phones, so it takes about 15-20 seconds the first time around to connect. And there is a delay because actually it is, again, satellite technology, which goes up then first to the satellite, gets beamed back down to the dispatch center. So if you have an emergency and you're using one of the satellite phones, just open it up, press the button, and just wait. But please wait, because yes, they will answer. Dispatch will answer, and they will ask you about your emergency. So that's it's very important. And here's an interesting idea, and maybe Heidi, I don't know if you could address this. Could an extra tax on Airbnb's vacation rentals help to pay for more boots on the ground as far as enforcement goes?
Well, that would be tricky. I don't even know how we would implement that, and we don't do the enforcement, right? That's part of the issue. So it's CHP and the sheriff's office and local police departments when they're intersect for the roads. It's Bureau of Land Management and State Parks for on the river. So we don't actually do the enforcement. We have talked about increasing the tickets on cars. That's another question that's come up. That's another issue. We did go to the Board of Supervisors and increase the cost of a ticket for one crossing. And so we're looking at doing that as Trisha mentioned, we're looking at a recreation plan, because we don't want to just increase the cost one place and people go to the next place. We want to do something that's consistent across the board, and perhaps increasing it double what we're already doing now. Of course, that would have to go pass a vote of the Board of Supervisors, but we are looking at increasing the cost of parking again, because that is something we may have some control over.
And that is one, the increased fines. And I believe a couple of years ago, there was a representative from the court that actually came and said, okay, if you raise these tickets above a certain amount, then basically each case would have to go in front of the court, and I mean, these parking tickets alone would clog the court. So that was also one of the reasons why the tickets were not, the fines are not higher. And the other thing, what about towing, and why aren't there more cars being towed, especially at Purdon and Edwards? I think that's a very simple answer there, Mike.
Yeah, if I could answer to that directly, tow trucks simply can't get down there, number one, and two, a lot of times they decline to go down there. It's unsafe for them to go across those bridges. Sometimes the gross vehicle weight on those tow trucks with the vehicles, they're just concerned about it. They decline to come down. So oftentimes we can make that request, and if they're available, they might come down, but more often than not, they decline to assist with the towing of vehicles.
And again, the amount of time it also takes for tow trucks. For example, this weekend there were several cars. Well, there were a lot of cars that were parked basically from the Independence Trailhead down to the river, and there was simply no tow trucks available because they were all busy with accidents. So there's not always tow trucks available, but the smaller crossings, like you said, there is just no way to get a tow truck down there and then to have them actually be able to turn around.
Yes, that is the big issue, is getting them to be able to turn around. I mean, they can get down there, but sometimes they have issues or concerns about getting across that bridge. So getting down there with that equipment, those tow trucks are big. They're oftentimes not four-wheel drive, so the access is an issue, along with the ingress and egress routes for them with those vehicles.
And another question that we get a lot is here, educating the public more about and telling them why no parking. I haven't seen a why no parking anywhere in a town or etc. It doesn't say you can't park here because no parking means no parking. And do you think that it would be helpful if the no parking signs would include reserved for emergency services? And is that even something that can actually legally be done?
Perhaps I can jump in on that. So because these are public roads, we are required to use signs that are approved by Caltrans, and so there's the California Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices. They'll make me say that twice, right? But it's basically the rule book for all signage. And so the signs that we have out there are the ones that are allowed, and we can't be too creative with those signs at all. As far as the need to identify emergency pull-out areas, again, we work very closely with our partners. We meet out there at least once a year to walk through what kind of signage would best help our emergency responders. We could certainly consider that, though. The more I'm listening here, I'm thinking perhaps that would help explain to people why not to park here. I mean, we don't mind trying things. It's just past experience will probably show people will still park there. But let me take that back to our road crew and we'll see what we can do. I appreciate the suggestion.
And Pascal, maybe
Yes.
this is a good time also to talk about the information campaign that we have really launched this year. And maybe Betsy or someone can speak to that more, but that we are actively on social media and the newspapers and with our bandanas. Every year we have a bandana with all the safety messages, with a QR code to get more information for safety. I mean, we do a lot of education now. We just had a bunch of signs up downtown in Nevada City educating people. So we are recognizing that, reaching out and educating folks on why not to park there, why to treat the river the way it should, why there's safety issues. And we're doing that as well now. And so we recognize that more education is always helpful.
And maybe probably Betsy or Melinda, can you guys talk a little bit about the information campaigns, because you with Sarah from the county have been the big drivers behind pushing and amplifying the messages, both safety messages and tips. So can you talk a little more about those?
Sure. We have really worked to amplify it by making sure that we have doing things like creating the same messaging, pushing it across everybody's platform. So that means anybody that has a social media account, from CAL FIRE to Circle to Bear Yuba to Nevada County, right? They are all pushing out the same message, and a lot of it is focusing on those 5 Ps. So explaining to people that parking irresponsibly isn't just about a ticket. It's about making sure that emergency vehicles can get down there when they need to, so that you or your loved one or your friend isn't left stranded. And so we've been doing a lot of work together collectively to explain the why behind all of the rules, and the hopes that if people understand, they'll obey them instead of just being like, well, that's stupid, I do what I want because I do what I want.
Anything to add, Melinda? So just a couple questions about Purdon and Purdon and Edwards. So for example, on red flag days, why can't we simply shut down access to Edwards and Purdon and probably Rice's Crossing, just to avoid any additional danger, accidents? Because there were quite a few, there have been quite a few accidents, car accidents, and also the fires that started so far were car fires. So what about just curtailing access on say on red flag days only?
I'm not, to curtail access on the roadways, of course, I would defer that to our transportation folks. A closure of a state park outside of an emergency type of situation is something that's a high level type of government decision. Actually, my charge is to keep them open. But with that said, there's all sorts of, I believe, iterative steps that we can take in regards to when and where, which is what we do, is when and where folks can use flame, whether it be wood, charcoal, propane. But the actual, I mean, I realize, yeah, from watching the news and on Yubanet, a lot of these issues that we have are vehicle-based fire starting incidents. And so interesting concept. I'm not sure how we would implement that functionally from the state park side of things. The big way that we have of controlling capacity is when and where and for how long we let people park. And of course, assuming that, as we've talked about, some people don't pay attention to where we want them to park. But that's kind of our big way of closing a lot, or when the lot gets full, closing it for the day and not letting anyone else. I mean, those are kind of the tools that we have. But to a closure, like of, don't come up here type of closure, which I think is what's being talked about here. And I could see the positive side of that is you're not going to have as many risk of vehicle fires. From the state park side of thing, I would have to have Black Hawk helicopters and the National Guard from my side of things to try to keep people out. I think functionally, I'm not sure how we would actually close the river outside of, like I talked about, a lot, or putting the lot full sign up, that type of thing. Beyond that, I'm not sure how we would implement that, but I do see the thinking behind it.
Yep, I'm going to jump in here too. I think that you're exactly right. I mean, this is a difficult situation. I understand why people would want to consider this, but we, as a federal land managing agency, we have no control over those roads, so we can't actually legally close those roads. So, and closures for us, I think this is different from the Forest Service, but the Department of the Interior has pretty strict rules about how things are closed, and it really, it's health and safety driven. So it's an imminent threat to health and safety. A red flag is a warning, and as such, we take it seriously in that we increase and make the pretty strict fire regulations, and when we implement those, they're very enforceable. But doing a closure for a warning would be difficult and not necessarily mission driven.
And so a lot of these questions, of course, were prompted by the closure of the national forest due to the fire, the heightened fire danger and the lack of resources. Because again, it's different. Forest Service, it's different. First of all, they're a little higher up. Most of their lands are a little higher up. But another thing is that yes, of course, at some point there will be fires, and the important thing is for people who live year-round, who live in the river canyon, to be prepared, to be aware, and then for the recreationists to have a way to be notified. And that's another question that came up here. So in case of a fire, how do you notify hikers and recreationists, and are there plans to get people out safely?
Yes, I don't know the details of it off the top of my head, but all of our state parks have wildfire incident plans in place. They're the ones we hope we don't use, but I'm sorry I don't have that level of detailed knowledge of the nuts and bolts of it, but they are something that exists.
Well,
We've actually had a lot of experience, unfortunately, in implementing our wildfire plans over the last few months, and so we're getting good. Unfortunately, we're getting good at it.
Yeah, speaking from the sheriff's office point of view, we have the high-low sirens. We've done some community outreach with that. We've publicized that. There's YouTube videos out there. A lot of rural agencies across Northern California are going to that high-low siren. If you guys aren't aware of what that sounds like, just imagine when you watch the movies and you hear the European sirens, that high-low pitch. It's completely different than our standard sirens that we would utilize to get to any other emergency. The only time you're going to hear that from an emergency vehicle in our area is if there is some sort of imminent threat and you need to be aware and evacuate. So speaking from the sheriff's office, we would work in collaboration with our partners on the river to get that word out. Ultimately, it does rely a little bit on people paying attention when they're down those rivers. If you see smoke, if you smell smoke, if you see a fire, get on out, warn everybody as you're leaving those rivers. But yeah, pay close attention to those high-low sirens. If you hear that, it is time to start paying attention and get out as safely as you can.
And here's another question for you, Mike. What would it take to deputize, say, search and rescue folks to help with the lack of staffing for as far as patrols goes in law enforcement? Would that be an option?
Well, without speaking specifically, there's certain requirements that it takes to become a peace officer in the state of California, which includes certain training in academies. We can't just deputize anybody we want to go out and start doing law enforcement. The sheriff has been very proactive in trying to find solutions because we do recognize that we are short-staffed. We are trying to do our best to help out partners and to address these issues as they come up, including parking situations down there. It does come down to a staffing issue and a numbers issue. So the sheriff Moon has created the opportunity for our, say, for instance, our animal control officers. They have limited peace officer powers. They have an ability to go down to the rivers when they're not busy to write parking enforcement tickets. And when we think of parking enforcement, naturally we talk about the highway patrol because it is a public roadway. But we also, the part of the cohort group, we involve fire prevention officers. Fire prevention officers are people that you wouldn't typically think are down there doing parking enforcement. Those are peace officers, and they do help us out immensely in addressing the parking situation. So it's not just the sheriff's office. We help out. It does fall back on public roadways. The vehicle code is typically the main responsibility of the highway patrol, but all of the partnerships of all of the agencies that are represented here and even more address these issues. In short, it's not as easy as we would think to deputize a search and rescue volunteer or any other person that came to the sheriff's office and said, sign me up, I want to go write parking tickets. Is simply not that easy of a task as it would sound like.
And another thing that's bugging a lot of people is amplified music. People bringing sound systems, whole sound systems down to the river and well, forcing everybody else to share in their taste of music. Are there actually rules about boom boxes, amplified music in the River Canyon, or is it really just a question of civility?
Well, disturbing the peace is a one citable action, but more likely from a state park side of things, it would be if we did have staff available and to receive the complaint and we're on site, it would be more of an educational contact. Of course, the challenge is it's a big river and there's only so many public safety folks. But at some point it's disturbing the peace. I'd really like to see that more solved as on a human level, but I might be an optimist.
And the illegal mining, there's a couple questions about that. What's being done to, first of all, to stop it, and then also to remedy some of the impacts, and also impacts on water quality, impacts on aesthetics, etc. So
I did get a couple of data points from our local staff, and one, they did mention this kind of a newer phenomenon, perhaps, and they mentioned Jones Bar having several incidents this year, which they remarked that was unique for illegal mining activities. And basically we do have projects to clean up the remnants of what was going on down there, working with Department of Fish and Game on that. A lot of the mining is occurring in the waters, the navigable waterways. So we're working with our partner Fish and Game on that. California Department of Fish and Wildlife. And noting that it's something from our perspective, it was something new we were seeing, focused around Jones Bar, took efforts to, when we found out about it, stop it, working with Department of Fish and Wildlife, and now are going to take on the follow-up cleanup on that. And so I think that'd be something for us to continue to watch on if that's going to be a continued trend, and what we need to do in the future. Is it a bandana item next year? I'm not sure.
We're seeing some of that same kind of illegal mining at Purdon Crossing. So, and that is kind of a mess because of the land pattern. There's private land, there's state land, and there's federal land. There is an individual that we do have some information on. We have a vehicle, a license number, and we are actively seeking him out. So hopefully we'll be able to kind of nip that one in the bud. But if people do see things like somebody carrying a gas can or hear an internal combustion engine, that is completely illegal right now in that canyon. So if you do hear that, that's something that we can report, and actually Fish and Wildlife can cite on private land or public land for that illegal dredging if it's occurring. There's also a thing called high banking, which is done with a motor that it's very similar to a dredge, although it's taking water from the river, putting it up on the hill and running it down through a sluice box. Both of them they're not legal, and they're both very damaging to the river corridor. So if those are if that's seen, it would be great to report it and we could get a pattern of use. I'd be happy to make something happen here. So our law enforcement is aware of it, and he is in contact with the state, and hopefully we can get something done.
sounds great. And to get less cars down to the various crossings, the idea of the shuttle where people park at the route center and then take a shuttle down to whichever crossing. So probably 49 and Purdon and maybe Edwards would be the three. And I believe that That has been tried. But are there any plans to revive it and maybe have the Nevada County Transit take that over? ID?
And I could help with this, Supervisor, if you'd like. Sure. So for Nevada County Public Transit, now called Nevada County Connects, we still already provide, and we're looking at continuing to provide service down to the State Route 49 river crossing. That's on our way to North San Juan. And it's something that we're hoping to advertise more in coming years. As far as going to Purdon and Edwards crossings, we do not have the vehicles for that at this time, but that is an idea that has been discussed and we can continue to look at. It's really finding the funding to provide the service and the vehicles to provide that kind of service down to the rivers. Typically public transit is primarily intended for getting people to work and to shopping and so forth. But it is something that our transit manager is looking at and will continue to look at.
And how did you want to add anything to it, or just let
No, that's actually news to me that we're already looking into that. See, that's how great our staff is. But you know, there was the shuttle earlier that a couple of private folks tried to put together, and it was a struggle. I mean, we did what we could to help with that as well. If private companies could make that work, if we had parking areas elsewhere that we could use to have people park elsewhere and take the shuttle down, and that somebody could make a business out of it, that would also be great. I know the guys who tried it worked really hard on it and just couldn't make a go of it yet, but maybe that time is coming around again.
And we are getting pretty close to our cutoff time. So if possible, I would like to have all our panelists, because we have a lot of other questions, but I'd really like to toss it back to Melinda and Betsy and tell us what the next steps are, and talk a little bit about the survey and where can people participate, what's it going to do, and where do we go from here?
Thanks, Betsy. Do you want to talk a little bit about the survey, and then I can wrap up with a couple of thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. So we do have a number of different questions, sections in the survey. Some of it's just about your own usage. We do have a section on river usage, why people visit it, what they kind of activities they think should and shouldn't be allowed. And then a number of questions on visitation and what you might like to see happen, what your biggest concerns are, and we want people to rank their choices. And then another section on addressing the impact. So what tools do you think are the most effective? What are you in favor of, and so forth. And then we end with a section on infrastructure and give some options there, as well as asking about funding, enforcement, and finally assessing attitudes about tourism generally, because we hear tourism is pretty complicated. It can bring a lot of benefits to the community, and obviously we've focused a lot in this discussion on some of the negative impacts. So if tourism is here to stay, kind of how do we deal with it, and what different initiatives might we be able to implement in order to develop the funding pathways or the funding structures in order to create a more sustainable tourism package for everybody that lives on the Yuba.
So we're going to be releasing that survey, as Betsy said, here hopefully next week, but later this month. And please do share it far and wide. You don't have to be a resident of Nevada County to take the survey. We want to hear from people who use the river. And we talked a lot about use and overuse and impacts, and Circle's River Ambassador program has been a good addition to our community, but it's not the end all be all, right? But it's one thing that we're doing. But it's not, I said it goes through Labor Day, which is true, but it really ends with the cleanup. So many of you who've been around in Nevada County for a while have maybe heard of the Yuba River cleanup. So this is our 24th year. And it's a multi-day event this year. With COVID, it actually starts the 11th, just in a couple of days, and it goes through, I want to say, the 17th. And it's an opportunity for folks who live here to give back. And so we would just assume not have the cleanup. Our goal is to make ourselves obsolete, right? Put ourselves out of business. We don't want to have to run this event, but we're not there yet. And so we're still at the point where we need people to help us out. So if you're interested in helping make a difference this year right away, that's one actionable thing that you as a community member can do, and we'd be so grateful for your support on that. So you can check us out at yubariver.org. And it goes a little bit longer than I said. I did get that date wrong, sorry. So it does go through the 18th. So there's a lot of opportunities to participate there. And that's kind of the end of that River Ambassador season. But the work doesn't stop, right? This group and so many others continue to meet all year, and we talk about these issues. We've captured your questions. There's no way that we could get to answer all of your questions tonight. I saw them they kept coming through, and I'm so grateful for the participation and engagement, and keep them coming. This isn't your only opportunity, but we've captured the ones here. We'll do our best to take into consideration your comments and your questions and try to get some answers out there in whatever ways we can over the coming months to you. But if you didn't get a chance to participate tonight, if you're watching this recorded, we still want to hear from you. You can reach out to me directly, anybody at Circle, any of the folks on here, I'm sure would love to hear from you as well. And we can consolidate all the information that we're gathering. But just so much appreciation for everybody who's on this call, for all of you who are participating and listening. I'm guessing that you're here because you love the Yuba and you love this community. And thank you for using your voice and sharing what you're seeing and helping us all do the best that we can do, pushing all of us here to do more, to do better, and to serve you and to serve the community. Really appreciate it.
Thanks a lot, Melinda. And I think we can conclude with the one comment from that was in the Q&A, which encapsulates what this community is really all about. It's like, and what can we do to help? It wasn't the question, it was just, and what can we do to help? So it's really great to see that, to hear that. So I would like to thank all of the panelists, all of the attendees, everybody who sent the question, email, chat. We'll capture it. This will be recorded, will be up on YouTube pretty shortly. Meanwhile, thank you everybody for participating, and please be safe. Peak fire season's not over, but we're all here, and we will continue to work together so that eventually we all can go to the river on a weekend and have a great time. With that, be safe everybody. Good night.